That being said, we are, discussing future updates for Moonkin down the line, not for launch, but for a future patch, and we're looking to sort of address a lot of the pain points that the community brought up for sure.
We're back. All right. So Balance Druid on the anniversary patch, I don't even know what patch this is going to be, 11.0.2 or something like that, is actually getting a fairly sizable amount of changes. Most people would probably classify this as a rework in some capacity. There aren't like large mechanical changes. We are going to get some class tree changes in terms of how our class tree works. I think you could probably safely say that this is a rework for all intents and purposes. And I think that they've actually swung pretty big with some of the changes that they currently have with War Within Moonkin. And so let's kind of take a step, talk about the changes, talk about the pros, talk about the cons, and just in general how I feel about the changes just as a whole. First and foremost, let's talk about some of the talents that ended up getting removed. Starfall is now learned at level 15. Greater Alignment ends up getting removed, and Lunar Shrapnel ends up getting removed. So Greater Alignment, I'm not shocked that this talent ended up getting removed. It was very strange. Even as a 3-minute CD, Celestial Alignment, not exactly the strongest cooldown ever. Greater Alignment never really felt like it had a great place. There was some weird synergy that it had with Stellar Flare, which I thought that maybe could be interesting, but it just ended up not being interesting. Shrapnel getting removed, that's fine. I know that reads 20% increased starfall damage. I'm fine with it getting completely removed. Not a big deal at all. So basically, let's start from the top. I logged into the PTR as well, so we can take a look at the tree as we kind of go through. We got a couple of new talents. First off, we have Sunseeker Mushrooms. So Sunfire damage has a chance to basically shoot a mushroom at the target. After 1 second, the mushroom detonates. It gives you the effect of Wild Mushroom on the target. This ability is 2 RPPM. Obviously, as you know, Wild Mushrooms just in general are 30-second recharge, and so 2 RPPM on something like this, maybe it's a little bit low, but we'll talk about that in a second. Whirling Stars, Celestial Alignment's cooldown is reduced to 75 seconds, and now it has 2 charges, but its duration is reduced by 40%. So this gives you like a 9-second CA whenever you press it. Very interesting talent just as a whole. Astronomical Impact, the critical strike damage of your astral spells is increased by 20%. There's also a bug with that. Giving us some critical strike scaling. Basically, we have like no critical strike scaling in our entire kit, so we never even had a reason to actually use crit. So now this actually gives us some crit scaling. Crashing Star, Shooting Stars has a 15% chance to instead call down a Crashing Star, dealing astral damage to the target and generating 4 AP. We also have Halo of Stars, which casting a free Star Surge or Starfall grants Solstice for 3 seconds. Free spells cast by Convoke also end up granting 1 second version of this effect. There's also Circle of Life and Death, which is returning, which is Moonfire, Sunfire, Stellar Flare, and Starfall deal their damage in 20% less time, and your healing over time effects last 15 seconds less. Okay. So let's hack away at the new stuff. Sunseeker Mushrooms. I think it's an interesting node. I actually initially read this, and I think that this is the problem that Wild Mushrooms have right now, is that you're like pretty heavily GCD locked, especially with like a Loon's Chosen on AoE. So I think that Sunseeker Mushrooms, and mushrooms in general, are actually some of my favorite part of the Druid spec tree. And the fact that we're not actually able to use Wild Mushrooms in any capacity right now is kind of unfortunate. I feel like that should almost be an auto take for Mythic Plus, but it just unfortunately is not. Now, the issue that Sunseeker Mushrooms have currently is that the RPPM is really low. 2 RPPM, and it's basically like a random proc that you can't control when you're using it. You would always take Wild Mushrooms if this was the case. Maybe you're saving the GCD. But I think that, like, just looking at that, maybe the RPPM is a little bit low. They obviously did move some things around as well, which I guess we'll have to cover that. We'll talk about the placement of this in a little bit. I think that mushrooms are actually pretty interesting, and I actually do like the direction that they went with adding Sunseeker Mushrooms. Obviously, as primarily a Mythic Plus player, I think that this node's cool. I hope it's better. I hope it ends up getting better, and I hope it's something that you can actually end up using with decent consistency. Either that or Wild Mushrooms. I'm down for either one at this point, frankly. Whirling Stars, Celestial Alignment's cooldown is reduced to 75 seconds and has 2 charges, but duration is reduced by 40%. I think that this is probably the coolest change. By far the best new talent, in my opinion. I think that I was cooking up a build with... So basically, there's like a Force of Nature Control the Dream build. That's what you're going to be primarily playing on 11.0 is like Force of Nature with Control the Dream. And I think that there's like really cool stuff that you can do with with Whirling Stars, Control the Dream, CA, and like Convoke and Force of Nature, where you're ending up like you press one charge of your Celestial Element with the like on pull whenever you're convoking, right, with the trees, and then the next trees that you have available, you press your CA again, and then the next convoke that you have up, you can actually delay this convoke by 15 seconds, right, because you're playing Control the Dream, and that resyncs with the Force of Nature and the Celestial Alignment as it comes back up. And I think that just sequencing felt really nice whenever I was doing that. I thought that in general, Whirling Stars, that's pretty cool. It's one of those things now that now we basically have no situation where we have a 3-minute CD, realistically. I guess you can, in theory, not path into this stuff, but the node that Whirling Stars and Orbital Strike is on is like obviously in the middle of the tree, so it's like pretty much a free take at any given moment. So having the ability to be able to path into either, this could get down to 65 seconds with Keeper of the Grove, but like 75 or 2-minute CD, it's really nice for Moonkin. I think that as it currently stands, it's like Whirling Stars ends up being a more single target focused option, and Orbital Strike ends up being a more Mythic Plus focused option. That's kind of why I'm looking at it right now. Astronomical Impact, the critical strike damage of your astral spells is increased by 20%. We had, like I said earlier, we had basically no crit scaling, and so putting this in our tree, giving us a little bit of crit scaling, making that a less dead stat than it has been in the past is kind of interesting. I will say, obviously, I don't think that like stats are particularly interesting in general, but I don't think that I think this is pretty good. It just makes crit gear better. And so you don't, like, there's going to be situations where you're going to end up feeling less bad about your gearing options. Because, like, as it currently stands on retail, it's basically just Mastery Haste perma. And, like, crit and verse aren't really that good. And the only reason you're even playing crit and versatility is because you're entering stat penalty. So, like, you're just, I guess I'll pick up some of the stat because it's not in penalty. Yeah, but this is good talent. I'm a fan of this. I think that this is a solid node. Crashing Star. Now, I messed around with this a little bit. I'm gonna be straight up. Crashing Star and Hail of Stars. I tried to play this whenever I was doing like a Mythic Plus build with the Galoon's Chosen. I struggled to actually figure out when this is supposed to be useful. I think that Crashing Star might end up being like a single target node, just in general, where Shooting Stars has a 15% chance to call down a Crashing Star, but I ended up trying to play this AoE build with Touch of the Cosmos, which ended up getting reworked. Well, I'll cover that in a second, and Starweaver, which gives you a bunch of free Star Surge and Starfalls, which should in theory give you this Solstice, right? I think the issue that I have with both Hail of Stars and Crashing Star is Shooting Stars isn't like that sick. It's one of those things that like there's no instant feedback from like Solstice, right? I don't really notice my astral power going up, right? It doesn't feel like I'm actually doing anything. And I think this is like one of those situations where it's just like Shooting Stars, they have like this DR whenever you have a bunch of targets dotted. And so things like Solstice obviously don't feel that great. And it's like, I feel like this is supposed to be for like Mythic Plus or like some AoE build, but Shooting Stars, Solstice, Crashing Star, all of these things are like a primarily single target thing, and so it's kind of wonky. Not necessarily in love with this. I don't think they're really that poorly designed. It's just I don't think that they fit in the way that it just didn't feel like they fit in the correct way, in my personal opinion. Circle of Life and Death. I don't like Circle of Life and Death. I mean, I'm not really going to sugarcoat it too terribly much. I think that this node is not great. It got reworked into Cosmic Rapidity. I think it's tough to see usage in any Mythic Plus capacity. I think you can maybe see usage of it on single and 2 targets. I do know that Blizzard does love this stuff where they talk about creating dot builds for Moonkin. It's just weird though, because like your mastery ends up making you deal bonus damage to targets that are affected by your Moonfire and Sunfire, but Moonfire and Sunfire direct damage doesn't do a lot, so you have to like reapply your dots often, and it's like Circle of Life and Death doesn't. It's kind of like the opposite, right? Like what you want to do is you want to be building or spending. You want to be building and spending, right? What you don't really want to be doing is like pressing your dots and having a lot of dot management. It's kind of like a weird dynamic for Moonkin. And then like especially on AoE as well, where it's like for Mythic Plus, and this is the reason that it's like not very good for Mythic Plus, is because like after you dot the target, what you want to be doing is you want to be pressing your Starfire and you want to be pressing your Starfall. You don't really want to be like redotting. And that's why something like Ethereal Kindling is like so good. And so Circle of Life and Death is like in direct opposition to that. I don't love this node. I think this node's like pretty beans. Starfall, baseline. Starfall damage increased by 10%. Great. Fantastic. Great change. Never going to hear me complain about that. That is a banger. Wild Mushroom now generates 10 astral power upon hitting a single target, up from 5. Again, I was talking about mushrooms being difficult to balance. I think that mushroom should almost... Personal opinion, I think that mushroom should always be a take in Mythic Plus. I think that this is like a node that should be an auto take in Mythic Plus. The reason that it's not auto taken in Mythic Plus is because you lose all of your single target to take this. You end up losing just all of your single target to end up playing for this thing that gives you, and it's actually not that bad. It gives you about 5% AoE, which is not a bad node. But you just end up losing such a sizable amount of your single target. You end up not being able to play this in Mythic Plus. However, giving it 10 astral power upon hitting a single target, that's good. That's going to end up trying to balance it out a little bit more. I don't think the problem is like this isn't enough. Like you're still losing way too much. You're still losing too much single target to play this, but I don't know. I think the mushrooms in general should be just better. Warrior Balloon increases astral power generation when affected starfires by 30%, was previously 40. Fine. This is like a upper tree talent anyways. It's like there's this weird situation where we just are generating way too much AP from Warrior Balloon starfires. With the Loons chosen, it's fine. I think this is a fine nerf. Nature's Grace no longer increases the damage of affected Wraths and Starfire, so Nature's Grace ended up getting moved as well. Where it's just cast time, that's probably fine. I think that there's this weird thing where you wanted to really spell queue your Nature's Grace, and you're like heavily incentivized to spell queue your Nature's Grace properly to make sure you're getting like damage bonus inside of your Eclipse, and now removing that, makes the spell queue garbage a lot less important. So I think this is totally fine. Makes it a lot less enticing as like a talent though. I don't know. I haven't looked at numbers on it. Like I don't know any numbers on any of that stuff, but it does make it a lot less enticing for talent. Orbital Intensity is now no longer a 2-point node instead of it's a 1-point node. Yeah. So it's somewhere in between in terms of damage. This is fine. I mean, this is good for like a Loon's Chosen, right? Like Loon's Chosen really wants your Starfire to be like absolutely cooking. Yeah. Smolder's chance to trigger is reduced to 35%, was previously 40%, and deals 60% of damage dealt, was previously 50%. This might be a hot take. I'm not really sure how everybody else in the community feels about this, but this is just my personal opinion. I hate Astral Smolder. I think it's complete nonsense. I think that nodes like Waning Twilight are kind of interesting, but a node like Astral Smolder completely like just giving you permanent Waning Twilight is just garb in my mind. Like the thing with Waning Twilight is whenever you have 3 periodic effects on your target, your damage is dealt, like your damage dealt is increased by 6%, and that would be cool if you actually had to think about like what you were doing with your dots, or like how you were actually supposed to get that, whether it be via Stellar Flare, whether it be through Mushroom Dot or something like that. But the fact that you just like passively get it through Astral Smolder, and that's like all right, how do you get Waning Twilight Dot? Oh, it's always through Astral Smolder. I'm not in love with this. I think that, reducing its chance to trigger to 35% is fine. I think that just like the presence of this node, whenever they added it, whenever I talked about like the spec getting really simplified down, I think this was like this is part of it too, where it's just like Smolder is like really weird. Cosmos ended up getting updated. I think this is probably the best design decision that they could have made with Touch of the Cosmos. Casting Wrath in an Eclipse has a 12% chance to make your next Star Surge or Starfall free, and casting Starfire in an Eclipse has an 18% chance to make your next Star Surge or Starfall free. Previously, it was like Starfire can give you a free Starfall, and Wrath can give you a free Star Surge, and then that had like this weird buggy implication with Weaver, and you could like override your procs and stuff like that. Now you can no longer override your procs because both of them are free, and I think that Touch of the Cosmos is actually a more interesting node because of this. I like free proc based effects that you have to track. I actually like Touch of the Cosmos and Star Weaver. I think both of those are pretty cool. And so I think that, Cosmos turning into this, personally, I think this is a good change for Cosmos. Boat is now 816 as opposed to 1020 crit, so nerfing it a little bit, which, all right, yeah, whatever. The node's OP. Node was previously OP. I don't know if it's still OP. I haven't looked at numbers, but it was OP. Overbreaker calls down full moon every 30 shooting stars, was 25. I have no thoughts on this, really. Goldrin's now a one-pointer, and its damage is reduced by 35%. So basically, they moved Goldrin to a one-pointer. They neutered the dog, by the way. This thing is bad. Basically, they gave us the same damage. You really wanted the two-pointer on Goldrin. That's why it was good. It's not good at one-pointer. But they gave us the 1-point damage for Goldrin, and now it's... I suspect without any changes, this thing is going to be completely useless. Communion no longer... I don't know what I just said. Communion no longer grants astral power on entering an eclipse. Instead, entering an eclipse will cause your next Star Surge or Starfall to cost 15 less astral power. So this is the Season 1 set bonus-ish. This is the Vault of the Incarnate set bonus post-nerf. You know, it's... What do I even want to say about this? So it still has the 20 astral power attached to it. So it's got the nice effect. I think that I don't love this node just generally. Whenever they reworked the free spender that you were getting from the Vault of the Incarnates into the cost reduction one, this entire dynamic felt really bad. I don't think that Communion necessarily fixes this. I think that the reason that the Vault of the Incarnates one was cool is because it was also like, you're not only are you getting free spenders, but what did the free spenders do, right? The free spenders helped you build faster to your pulsar. They're also free, which is also inherently a better thing as well, right? But it's more just like, what do those free spenders do, or those cost reduction spenders actually do? And now we don't really have anything that we're doing with this. I mean, it's not terrible. I do think that this is a step in the right direction for like what Communion is supposed to look like. But I do think it maybe misses the mark a little bit as to why this entire like tier set bonus was fun in the first place. Twin Moons ended up getting moved. Nature's Grace ended up getting moved. Touch the Cosmos ended up getting moved. Connector added between Fawn, Warrior Balloon, and Celestial Alignment. Waning Twilight and Wild Mushroom swap positions. Added a connection between Umbral Intensity and Starlord. Cosmic Rapidity tooltip updated. So Twin Moons ended up getting moved. This is probably the most important thing right here, is this connection between Warrior Balloon and Celestial Alignment. This allows you to forego taking Nature's Grace or Nature's Balance if you really want to for like Mythic Plus base builds. Yeah, that was about it. Then the only other stuff is Keeper of the Grove, Potent Enchantments. So Potent Enchantments had this thing with Greater Alignment in it. And so now it actually instead has this thing with Whirling Stars. It actually reduces the cooldown of Celestial Alignment by an additional 10 seconds to bring it to 65 seconds as opposed to 75 seconds. Honestly, kind of fucking sick. I'm not gonna lie to you guys. The downside is that Celestial Alignment sucks ass, but this Potent Enchantments and Whirling Stars is kind of cool. Control the Dream now also has a text change to be more clear as to what's going on with it. So that's good. All right. Let's start with the good and then we'll get to the bad. The good, I would describe it is, if you like the current iteration of Moonkin, you're going to get some nice, cool stuff, right? You're going to get some moderately cool new things. This does feel like almost expansion level changes in terms of like what you're actually going to be getting. There's a new tree, some of this stuff ended up getting shuffled around. There's a couple of new interesting nodes. I think that like Sunseeker Mushrooms are really cool. I think the Whirling Stars is really cool. I think that Changed Cosmos can be nice. I really hope there's a build with Weaver and Changed Cosmos, because I like that proc based build. I think that in general is like fairly solid. I think that we're kind of, and I don't know, I obviously have to look at numbers, but just purely by feel, it seems like we would like enter into a state where Loon's Chosen has a bunch of like free procs attached to it, and then this Keeper of the Grove build ends up being, kind of laying into the double charge of Incarn use, kind of a similar thing where you're still basing this around Convoke the Spirits, so kind of a similar vibe as you're feeling on live right now for like how Keeper of the Grove is especially good. I think that they fixed up some of the pathing in the tree. I think the tree felt a bit more cohesive to path through. I think that making Starfall baseline, kind of shoring up a couple of these 2-point nodes into 1-point nodes is also fairly solid. Now it doesn't necessarily solve the issue with the 2-point nodes. Some of the 2-point nodes ended up getting reduced to 1-point nodes, but they ended up maintaining their like. It's like if I had 1 point in Umbral Intensity, right? That's all it is. It's like if I had 1 point in Goldrin, that's all it is. Most of the time, whenever they convert 2-point nodes into 1-point nodes, they leave them at their 2-node power. But Druid, for some reason, didn't necessarily get that. But I do think that they changed and at least helped path around the tree, made it a little bit more cohesive, adding a few additional nodes. Anything else positive? Let me think. Those are about it. I think that it's definitely not getting worse. Is the point that I do really want to hammer home before I start talking about some of the criticisms that I have about it. And if you're liking current Balance Druid, I think that's going to be continuing to move in the right direction for you, right? Like if you like the current iteration of Moonkin, you're probably going to continue to enjoy this. I kind of described it on stream whenever I was talking about it. So say we looked at it on a scale. Say a 5 is where Moonkin is on live right now. Say a 10 is the best iteration that they could have possibly created here. Say a 1 is they went in the complete wrong direction and completely ruined the spec. I think that this is probably like a 6. I think it's moving in the right direction, but it's not like a slam dunk or anything like that. But I do think it's moving in the right direction. I think they added some fun stuff. So talking about the things that I don't like. Now, it's nothing explicitly that they added. The stuff that I don't like is I don't think that they addressed the real problems that players have been having with Moonkin. First and foremost, Eclipse was never really addressed in any capacity. It doesn't feel good to manage your Eclipse ever. This is something that I really want to drive home with players, is like, I've never ended a fight or ended a dungeon with perfect Eclipse management and been like, wow, that felt really satisfying. I feel like that's a major misstep of having this really weird 2-resource system where we have to manage our Eclipse and our Astral Power, and then Eclipse just doesn't really do anything. And so then it kind of makes you just like ask, why is it there? It's kind of in the way more than anything else. And it kind of is in a way that I just don't like it. So I'd rather them either scrap it or rework it or turn it into something that we're actually like using, right? It made sense whenever it was like our mastery and you like had to actually pay attention to like what you were doing with your Eclipse. But as time has went on, they try to simplify the Eclipse down, but in my opinion, they've simplified it like too much. And now there's like nothing to do with the Eclipse. That kind of gets to my second point. The second thing that I don't really feel like they addressed is like, I don't think that there's like a payoff with the spec currently. So for a while, the payoff was like, I'm building towards my Pulsar proc. You know, I'm trying to generate all this Astral Power to get to my Pulsar proc. I just got to get to my next Pulsar, right? It's like the meme where it's just like, I just got to lock in. It's like, I just got to get to my next Pulsar, guys. We gotta lock in. And so I think whenever they removed it, while removing Pulsar is fine, I think that things like Lunation maybe can potentially bridge that gap. But I do think in general, finding that rotational payoff is something that I feel like the spec is missing, right? What is that home run that we're really looking to do? What is that like really big hitting ability or thing that we're trying to do? Because right now Celestial Alignment's really weak. It's probably the weakest CD in the game. And then even if being moved to 65 seconds or whatever and having 9-second duration, very, very weak cooldown just in general. And so it's just like, what is that big payoff? What are we supposed to have? Because like I think back to old iterations of Moonkin. And so payoff for a while was Pulsar. Payoff for a while was Pulsar with streaking stars. Even if looking back into Legion, there was things like OI that were your big payoff abilities because the proc on that thing was absolutely insane. There was also, you would play like OI with 2-minute Incarn and you were just like absolutely cooking. That was your big payoff moment, right? Was that 2-minute Incarn with the OI? You were playing to like reduce your Incarn to that 2 minutes, because reducing it to that 2 minutes was like a huge gain. And then you look back to even older iterations of where we had the previous Eclipse, right? We didn't have empowerments or anything like that. The WAD payoff was like, if I'm managing my Eclipse properly, I'm able to get a lot more damage from Starfire and Wrath whenever I'm able to utilize like the maximum gauge of the Eclipse. And then if you look back into like Mop and Kata, the payoff was like, I'm managing my eclipse properly by making sure that the eclipse is bouncing back and forth on a timely manner when I want it to, and then I'm supposed to be using the correct abilities as I'm in eclipse. As it currently stands, I think a talent like Lunar Calling is like really telling. Lunar Calling is right now the best talent for Luna's Chosen. You could say that this is due to tuning, but like I think that I'm just talking about design space wise. I think that Lunar Calling is problematic because it just like completely removes Eclipse altogether, and I think that like, dude, Eclipse, why is it here? That's my biggest issue with it. And then again, like circling back, there's just no payoff. What is my payoff for doing my rotation like 100% correctly? You could literally remove Eclipse and there's still the exact same level of payoff. I'm looking for this big like home run hit moment that I think that balance really lacks. And the final thing, and I didn't really expect this to get addressed like at all after I watched that interview or anything, but I think the final thing is like, dude, the hero talents, I don't think that the hero talents are doing an expansion level feature justice for what we have for Moonkin right now. I think Keeper of the Grove is fairly unliked by players. I think that they could have gone a bunch of different directions with Keeper of the Grove. Dude, imagine if they made Keeper of the Grove like Farseer Shaman, where we summon these trees, and instead of doing what they've already done for the past like 4 or 5 years, instead they are like mimicking her abilities or something like that, right? It could have been cool like that. Alternatively, we could have had some VFX attached to it and it summoned large ancients that did something more interesting. As it currently stands, they just like threw a bunch of our pre-existing abilities into the trees and they're like, yeah, this is fine, and then they overkitted them with a 24% damage amp, and so you're basically playing it because you can stack it with Convoke and it does single target damage, but like it's not a very fun play pattern. For Luna's Chosen, it was like it's building on a pre-existing play pattern that I didn't think was like especially solid to begin with. And so like building off of a pre-existing play pattern. So we have one hero talent tree that's like net neutral, and we have one hero talent tree that I would argue is a detrimental experience, a very unfun experience for me personally. And so like that, I didn't expect them to change anything with hero talents. Let me be very frank here. I expect the hero talents to like, if they're going to get changed, that's like a 12.0 dream. But I do think that like I have to call that out as like something that, I would have liked to have seen changed. Additionally, can we get our class tree salvaged? Like, is that possible? Like a possibility? I know that it might not have been in the scope for like a Balance Druid rework, but I'm just looking at this like, dude, this tree is still the exact same problems that it's faced the past 3 reworks that we've received, right? Where I don't have enough points for everything. I'm the only spec in the game that has to have actual choice. Why am I the only spec in the game that has to have actual choice, by the way? And I end up talenting a bunch of stuff that I actually just don't use, man. Like in this Mythic Plus build that I have, you end up putting points into just like actual garbage that you've never played before in your entire life, where you end up putting a point in a Rejuve, you don't use that. You end up putting a point in Iron Fur, you don't end up using that. You end up putting 2 points in Instincts of the Claw, you don't end up using that. And I haven't used Soothe in any of these dungeons, so I end up putting 5 points into stuff I've legitimately never used. No other class has like, there's not 1 point in any of the other classes that I play, at least like at a casual level, that I don't use out of my class tree, but for some reason I have 5 on my Moonkin. Like what is going on with that? Oh, okay, I guess this tree's kind of bricked. I don't have Starlight Conduit. It doesn't really matter. But you see what I'm saying, right? That's just more my point. Is like there's so many issues with the class tree. I would hope to see that to get fixed. In general, I think it's one of those situations I just want to reiterate. If you were already liking Moonkin, if you were enjoying the play pattern that you had in the first season, this is going to be probably just like a strict upgrade for you, right? Like I think the gameplay is improving. I think there's some things with like, the pathing. I think that pathing is getting better. I think they're adding some interesting nodes. I think they're adding some interesting synergies with a couple of things, such as like, giving us a little bit of crit scaling. This Touch of the Cosmos Weaver stuff could be, I think, really cool. Hopefully it ends up being like pretty good in Mythic Plus. I would love to see them buff the absolute shit out of Sunseeker mushrooms and make them good. But then there's some stuff that I don't think is like super sick that they still haven't addressed, like the lack of any like complexity in our spec. Where's the big payoff? What is the Eclipse system really doing? I suspected that they weren't going to remove the Eclipse system in the mid expansion update, even though it is supposed to be like a rework. But like, dude, I'm just like not in love with Eclipse anymore. I think that whenever they removed empowerments in favor of Eclipse, I was a bit for it, because empowerments didn't do anything, and I saw Eclipse as like, all right, this pathway to getting us to our secondary resource that actually does something. But I think that Eclipse has kind of been mismanaged to where Eclipse doesn't do anything either, man. So yeah. Anyways, those are my thoughts. I think in general, improving. Not too many complaints. Hopefully the spec ends up getting buffed in a couple of days. Interested in hearing your thoughts down in the comment section below. Yeah, that's it. Goodbye.